slideshow.
Hello. So for our project, we did a single-cylinder oscillating steam engine. This project consisted of
a single-cylinder oscillating steam
17 individual parts.
This project consisted of
a few that were reused
17
in
individual
multiple.
parts.
I wasn't thinking orientation.
A few that were reused in multiple
locations. My name is Ryan Sahanowitz.
Locations.
And this is our.
My name is Ryan Sahanowitz.
And I'm Michael Kaiser.
And this is our presentation.
Let's get in the middle.
In the next several slides, we will be going over some of the sub-assemblies that we created during this project, as well as going over some of the parts that we worked on that gave us some trouble when we were modeling them.
For our first subassembly, we have the flywheel subassembly. The flywheel subassembly consists of 4 parts.
Yeah, I don't like
3 of the parts being unique: the flywheel, the crankpin, and the crankshaft.
But how are we supposed to know when you're done?
The crankshaft.
Oh no, it's gone.
Connects
it's
both of these parts through the main shaft through coincident constraints. Then we offsetted the flat face of the flywheel to the main shaft of the crankshaft. On the other flat side of the crankshaft, we
Why do you guys have blank
coincidented
silences in your presentation? Dude, my first time using
crankshaft with the crank pin,
voice, I don't know.
and then surface constrain the crank pin to the crankshaft. The crank pin is what connects the flywheel subassembly to the piston rod.
The flywheel
And the
subassembly to the
crankshaft
piston
is
rod.
what connects
And the
the
crankshaft
flywheel
is what
subassembly to the
connects
frame itself.
the flywheel subassembly to the frame itself.
The first part that gave us trouble was the flywheel.
The
Now, the
first part that
flywheel is a
gave
very simple shape in that it's symmetrical about
Fun.
Yeah, we're
its
halfway
middle
through our
plane
slides,
and
we only have
the
3 minutes.
holes going
No,
around the center.
Yeah, we're at 3 minutes. Fuck. We're not
The
halfway.
thing that gave us trouble was the hole
We're halfway.
meant for the
We're almost
rub
halfway.
screw
And we're almost
in
halfway
the
through
flywheel
design.
assembly.
Some
Along with
minutes, so
the
as long as we do better than that.
drawings that had a lack
And
of
we can
detail
always,
to
what's
them,
cool? We can always go back.
there was no
and
real
if we need to lengthen
position
something,
for the grub screw itself.
like say you
So
somehow
to
talk about
determine
your cylinder
how to place
subassembly
it
for like a
on
minute,
the
30
plane
seconds.
was a
I
little
can always go
troubling.
back and just
However, using
Okay, well don't do that.
an educated guess and some
An
messing
educated
around
guess
with the
and
planes,
some
we were able
messing
to
around with the planes.
include it
We were able
to where it matched
include it to
where
where it
the
matched
drawing had it.
where the drawing
It
had it.
sounds like it sounds like I'm just pausing for no reason, which I am.
Did you pull that out of your ass, or did you meant to say that? The next subassembly that we created was
cylinder
subassembly. This
Like 30
subassembly
seconds.
included 12 parts,
Okay.
6 unique
30
parts:
seconds left.
the cylinder back block, cylinder head,
Talk.
cylinder bottom,
We can actually
rocking
probably see the
shaft,
time, yeah.
cylinder, and nylon
easier.
ring. This assembly is used to house the piston of
This is
the
not
steam
as bad.
engine.
This is kind of
and
cool. If I didn't actually have to
it
do this and
connects
despise it completely,
to
this would be
an
kinda
additional piece later on. I mean, we're at like 4 minutes. I'd say that
cool. It's probably around 4 minutes 30 seconds actually. We're at our 5th slide, so we're basically halfway.
in the
there.
creation
We might
of
just
this
have to
subassembly,
ramble.
we used several coincidence constraints about the cylinder
The
and
subassemblies.
the top
We used
and bottom.
We'll play it back and listen to it.
The
Let's just send it.
Let's just send it in. Okay, I'm fine with that.
back
Because if
block
we
was
listen,
we get this
we have to
quickly-
listen to it and like
Yeah, and then we're like,
constrained
oh,
to the
minutes to
cylinder
watch it.
itself through a contact
well, we can
constraint
just listen to it part
in
by
a
part.
slot that was cut into
We can just do
the
this when we
cylinder.
go.
I feel like this portion of the assignment is relatively
Well, other people will be watching.
okay. Is the audio still playing?
It's restarted.
The cylinder back block is one of the parts that
The cylinder
it seemed
back block is
simple
one of
at
the
first when we went to go create it,
parts
but
It
as
seemed
we
simple
began
at
modeling,
first when we
a few
went to go create
features
it,
stood
but
out
as
as
we
being
began
more
modeling,
challenging.
a few features
Those are
stood
the
out
2
as
holes that
being
you can
more
see in
challenging.
the front face.
Those
They
are
are not
the 2
straight
holes
holes,
that you
they
can see
are at
in
an
the front
angle
face.
20
guessing
degrees.
They are not straight holes.
In order to
They
do this
are at an
initially,
angle,
several different
20 degrees.
approaches were taken.
In order to do this
many
initially,
of which did
several
not
different approaches were
produce the
taken.
results that were
Many of which
desired.
did not
Ultimately, what
produce
was
the
done to
results
create
that
these
were
was
desired.
using
Ultimately,
a plane
what was done to
inserted
create
at
these
an angle to the
was
face.
using a
wish I
Even
was good at,
still,
like,
inserted
the drawing
at an
was
angle
separating
to
a
the
sounds,
little
face.
deleting it.
difficult to read
Even
that was
still,
provided,
the drawing
and
was a
finding the
little
position of
difficult to
the
read that
angled
was
ellipse
provided,
on the face
and
relative
finding
to the edge of the
position
block
of the angled
was
ellipse
difficult
on
and
the
took
face
an educated
relative to
guess
the edge of the block
to
was
get
difficult
approximated.
and took an educated guess to get approximated.
The piston subassembly was
The piston subassembly
another
was
subassembly that included 6
minute
parts,
30.
4 unique parts: the piston rod, crank pin, bearing, piston, and piston ring. Overall, none of the parts were particularly challenging to model. They were all primarily a profile that could then be revolved around the central axis. In the assembly itself, the coincident constraint was used quite frequently when attaching the piston to the rod and the rod to the crank pin bearing. One slight challenge in the assembly creation was the piston ring had really no faces. There were 2 curves, the inside and outside edge were both curves, so defining an offset constraint to have its position on the piston to be correct was a little difficult. What we ultimately did to solve this was we fixed the 2 components together in an approximate position, and that was able to work to create a fully constrained subassembly.
The last and final subassembly is the frame subassembly. This subassembly includes 13 parts and holds 3 unique parts: the frame supports, and the crankshaft bearing. This subassembly was not presented like the other subassemblies. This subassembly was not given to us by the drawings. We created this subassembly because it holds so many different screws and is kind of the basis of the whole part.
No one's gonna watch the video.
This subassembly was not hard to
and then-
align, using mostly the holes through the frame
It has
supports
6
and the
views.
frame itself
Someone didn't
to
watch it.
connect everything. It was easy
connect
to
everything.
coincident.
I feel like it would have been better just to give
Then
presentation
using a
in class.
contact and waste 1 or 2 class periods doing it.
Yeah,
Definitely.
But then we would have
A
had
contact
the
we
project done sooner.
connected the 2
contact
frame
we
supports to the frame. The
connected the
crankshaft
2
bearing
frame
was kind of
supports to
up
the
in the
frame.
air of whether we wanted
The
it to
crankshaft
stick on the
bearing was
frame
kind of up in the
subassembly
air of whether we
or
wanted
the
it to
flywheel
stick on the frame
subassembly.
subassembly.
The reason we
or
chose the frame
the
subassembly
flywheel
is because it
subassembly.
has 3
The
screws
reason we
going
chose the
through
frame
the frame to
subassembly
connect
is
it.
because it has 3 screws
So we
going
decided
through
that
the
was
frame to connect it.
more
So we decided that was
detrimental
more
constraint than just being
detrimental
coincident with the
constraint
crankshaft.
than just being coincident with the
Along with all the
crankshaft.
screws in the part,
Along with all
there are
the
4 grub screws
in the part,
covering up
there are 4 grub
holes
screws
near the top of the frame subassembly. These grub screws
covering
were
up
kind of
holes
random
near the top.
and out there, but they do serve a purpose. Can't see it.
Of the frame subassembly.
Look at that.
The-
The part that gave us the most trouble with the frame
The part that
subassembly
gave us the most
was
trouble
the
with
frame itself. The frame itself was not hard to create, but most of the holes on the frame
Did not have a given depth. So to find that depth, we had to use the other parts provided
the
to
other parts
assign
provided
the frame
to assign
holes certain depths.
the frame holes.
The most troublesome was the top 6 holes that actually go through the part almost completely. If you can see the 4 holes on the front face is where each of these holes stop. Besides that, this part was pretty simple to make and did not take a very long time. Besides that, this part was pretty simple to make.
Instead of having to take 2 days.
Here you can see a picture of our complete assembly. Using the several sub-assemblies made it a lot easier to assemble all of the various parts that make up this assembly. One thing to note is that the input and output steam pipes are not part of any of the sub-assemblies and were added as extra to this assembly.
Our advice to future students would to be, instead of splitting parts up by pages, is to decide the sub-assemblies beforehand and split the parts up according to that. This would help reduce any kind of interference you have between your individual parts, and then allow yourselves to get together and find out how the sub-assemblies connect to make sure those parts connect well. Another tip would be to download the screws beforehand and find out the pitch and thread length. That way you can use them in your parts instead of having to change them at the last minute. Thank you.